They say every family has secrets. I used to think ours didn't. We were the Whitmores, old money, old reputation, a name that meant something in Seattle's art circles. My father built the Whitmore Foundation, a cultural landmark that donated millions to museums, funded restoration projects, and hosted gala dinners filled with polite laughter and perfect champagne. I believed in it. I believed in him. But that was before I found out what the foundation really funded. Before I realized the inheritance I'd lost wasn't a mistake, it was a warning. Hi, I'm Grace Whitmore. And this is the story of how I discovered the truth behind my family's fortune, and why I had to destroy it to save myself. The funeral was quiet, tasteful, exactly the way my father would have wanted. White lilies. Black suits. A string quartet playing in the corner like grief was something you could choreograph. I hadn't seen my brother Owen in almost a year. He arrived late, as always, wearing a suit that looked borrowed and a smirk that didn't belong at a graveside. When he hugged me, I could smell whiskey beneath the cologne. It was like nothing had changed. The lawyer met us 2 days later in my father's library, a room that smelled of dust, leather, and unspoken things. The will was simple, brutally so. The estate, the foundation, the house, the trust, all of it went to Owen. I got a single line. To my daughter Grace, I leave my mother's necklace and my love. I remember staring at those words, trying to hear my father's voice behind them. Love. The kind you put on paper when you have nothing left to give. Owen didn't even pretend to look sorry. He just signed the documents, thanked the lawyer, and said he'd make sure I stayed involved with the foundation in some capacity. Like I should be grateful to be offered crumbs from a meal that had always belonged to me too. That night, I went back to the house, our family home, to pack up the things my father had promised I could keep. The rooms felt hollow without him, like the silence had been waiting for this moment. I walked through the study, the one room he'd never really let anyone into. The air was stale, thick with the smell of old varnish and secrets. The desk was locked. It took me an hour to find the key taped under the drawer. Inside were ledgers, old receipts, letters wrapped with string, and a USB drive labeled Vanguard. At first, I thought it was just more foundation paperwork. But when I plugged the drive into my laptop, it opened a folder filled with high-resolution images of paintings. Some I recognized from our collection, others I didn't. One caught my attention immediately, a Degas sketch supposedly destroyed in a fire 20 years ago. I opened the next file. A Renoir. Another piece listed as lost. Another fire. Another insurance claim. My stomach dropped. These weren't reproductions. They were originals. The metadata showed dates, restoration records, shipment manifests. All recent. All under my father's foundation. The man who'd built his reputation on preserving art for future generations had been hiding stolen masterpieces in plain sight. I spent the next 3 nights reading through every document. The letters told the rest of the story, transactions routed through offshore accounts, galleries in Zurich and Lisbon, payments to anonymous collectors. My father's handwriting appeared in the margins of several notes. Next to one shipment record, he'd written, "Insured GW remains uninvolved. She can't know. GW me." I didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal or the fact that he'd planned it. When I confronted Owen, he didn't deny it. He leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of bourbon, and said, "You were never built for this world, Grace. You wouldn't have understood what Dad had to do." I asked him if he'd known all along. He smiled. Of course I did. Someone had to keep things running. I wanted to scream, but the anger just sat there, heavy and useless. I left without another word. 2 days later, I got a call from the foundation's board. They were restructuring, they said. My consulting contract was being terminated. My access to the archives revoked. It was the second time in my life I'd been erased by men who claimed to love me. But this time I wasn't going to let it end quietly. I started making copies, digital backups of everything on that USB, scans of the letters, photos of the paintings. I stored them on a cloud account under a name nobody would connect to me. Then I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Daniel Price, a journalist who'd once interviewed me about art conservation ethics. He'd left the industry after a scandal, but he knew the underbelly of the art world better than anyone. When I told him what I'd found, he went silent for a long time. Then he said, "Grace, if this is real, you're sitting on an international crime ring." "I'm sitting on my family," I said. That's when it hit me, the choice I was about to make. Expose them and destroy everything with my name on it. Or stay quiet and live with the lie. I thought about the necklace my father had left me. My grandmother's. I opened the clasp one night and noticed something odd, the tiniest engraving inside the hinge. Coordinates. They led me to a storage unit outside Tacoma. Inside were more paintings, stacked behind tarps, the air heavy with oil and dust. I stood there staring at them, surrounded by beauty that wasn't ours to keep. That's when I knew what I had to do. It wouldn't make me rich. It wouldn't make me famous. But it would make me free. And freedom, I was learning, was worth more than any inheritance. When I was a child, my father used to tell me that art was the closest thing to truth humans could create. I believed him for years. I built my entire career around preserving that truth, restoring paintings, repairing frames, saving what could be saved. I never realized that while I was preserving beauty, my family was profiting from theft. After finding the storage unit, I spent a week pretending to be normal. I went to work at the small gallery that still hired me for conservation projects. I answered emails. I smiled when people asked how I was holding up after my father's passing. But inside, I was unraveling every thread of the Whitmore legacy. The documents on that USB had led me to dozens of paintings listed as missing or destroyed. But it wasn't until I started comparing foundation records that the pattern became clear. For decades, my family's charity had been a front, restoration projects used to launder stolen art, insurance claims filed for fake losses, duplicates commissioned to replace the originals. My father hadn't started it. The first record dated back to my grandfather. It was generational. A family business built on quiet deception and respectable faces. And Owen, my brother, was still running it. I needed proof, not suspicion. So I did what I'd always done best, I restored. Only this time, it wasn't a painting. It was the truth. I reactivated my old foundation credentials. The system hadn't been updated since my father's time, and I still knew the passwords. Late at night, from my apartment, I downloaded internal records, shipping manifests, insurance receipts, export licenses. Some of the most valuable pieces, I noticed, had disappeared during routine maintenance. The restoration notes were signed by Owen himself. One file caught my eye. Project Aurora. It listed a collection bound for a private museum in France, including a painting that had hung in my father's study for as long as I could remember, a Turner seascape. But according to this document, that same piece had been reported lost 10 years ago and reimbursed for $12 million. That was the moment I stopped mourning my father. Whatever good man he had been to me as a child had long ago been replaced by someone who thought legacy meant deceit. I called Daniel again. He sounded weary when he picked up. "You're sure you want to keep digging? Once you show your hand, there's no going back." "I'm not showing my hand," I said. "Not yet." We met at a cafe where nobody would know us. I gave him copies of the newest records. He scanned them quietly, whistling under his breath. "This isn't just fraud, Grace. These are federal crimes. If this leaks, your brother's going to prison." I didn't say it out loud, but that wasn't what scared me. What scared me was what else might fall with him, our employees, donors, the galleries that had trusted us. Not everyone in the foundation was guilty. Some were just like me, believing in something that never really existed. That night, I drove back to the Whitmore estate. The gates were still unlocked, like the house refused to admit it had changed owners. Owen's car was parked outside. I found him in our father's old office, sitting in the chair that wasn't his yet. He looked up when I came in, annoyed, maybe a little nervous. "Grace, you can't keep showing up here." "I'm not here for the house," I said. "I'm here for the truth." He sighed, like I was a child asking stupid questions. "You always had to make everything complicated." Dad did what he had to do to keep the foundation alive. The donors wanted results. The collectors wanted authenticity. We just gave it to them. "You stole from them." "No," he said softly. "We gave them what they wanted to believe." Isn't that what art's always been? That was the moment I knew he was lost. Whatever conscience he might have had was buried under years of justification and greed. I left without another word. The next morning, I received an email from a foundation lawyer. "Cease all communication with board members and staff. You are not authorized to access foundation files. Legal action will be taken if this continues." They knew I'd been inside the system. Owen had locked me out. But he underestimated one thing: I still had everything copied. Over the next month, Daniel and I worked quietly, building a record that no one could dispute. But we also made a decision: we wouldn't go public. Not yet. Not until we knew the art could be recovered and returned. If this was going to end, it had to end cleanly. I started reaching out anonymously to the rightful owners of some of the missing pieces. Museums, families, estates. I sent them evidence, shipment records, even photographs. I told them where to look: storage units, vaults, private collections. I didn't sign my name. And one by one, reports started appearing in the news: long-lost Monet recovered after decades. Stolen Degas sketch found in private storage. FBI investigating international art laundering ring. Owen called me one evening. His voice was low, controlled, the way he sounded when he was scared. "Grace, what did you do?" "I told the truth," I said. He laughed once, bitterly. "You think this makes you righteous? You just destroyed our family." "I think it's the first honest thing a Whitmore has done in 50 years. He hung up. That was the last time we spoke. The investigations dragged on quietly for months. The foundation shut down operations pending review. Donors vanished. Galleries severed ties. The Whitmore name, once printed on museum walls, was now whispered in backrooms as a warning. I thought I'd feel vindicated. Instead, I felt hollow. Like I'd buried not just my family, but every memory that came with it. But the emptiness didn't last. A few weeks later, I got a letter, handwritten, postmarked from Paris. It was from a curator whose museum had recovered one of the stolen paintings. She wrote, "Thank you, whoever you are. You gave us back a piece of history." That was enough. For the first time in years, I slept without waking in the middle of the night, wondering if I'd done the right thing. I had. And I knew the final step was coming, the one thing I hadn't done yet. It took nearly a year for the investigations to end. The Whitmore Foundation was dissolved quietly: no trials, no headlines, no closure that looked like justice from the outside. Just paperwork. Bank accounts frozen. Properties sold off. A family name erased with the stroke of a bureaucratic pen. I didn't attend the hearings. There was no point. Everything that needed to be said had already been written into the records. The truth had done its work. Owen fled to Europe before the indictments could land. The last I heard, he was living in Lisbon, still trying to reinvent himself under a different name. I don't think he'll ever come back. Maybe that's its own punishment, living a life where every introduction has to be a lie. My inheritance, what little of it was left, went to legal fees, then taxes. I kept one thing from the estate: my grandmother's necklace. The coordinates still engraved inside the clasp. A reminder of how lies hide in beautiful places. I moved into a small apartment overlooking the Sound. The walls were bare at first, and I thought I'd fill them with art someday. But I never did. I liked the emptiness. It made the space feel honest. People sometimes asked if I regretted it, exposing my own family. Ending a legacy that had fed me, educated me, shaped me. I always said no, but the truth was complicated. I missed my father's voice. I missed the version of him I thought existed. I missed believing that doing the right thing didn't have to hurt so much. But healing, I've learned, doesn't always look like happiness. Sometimes it's just the quiet relief of not lying anymore. I went back to work eventually, not for galleries or collectors, but for a small community museum that couldn't afford much. They trusted me to restore forgotten pieces, things too damaged or unimportant for the big names to bother with. And I found peace in that. In cleaning away the grime, in finding the image beneath what time and neglect had hidden. One afternoon, I was working on a small portrait, a woman's face, faded and cracked. As I lifted the old varnish, her eyes came into focus. They reminded me of my mother. The way she used to look at me when I was little, quiet, steady, like she was teaching me something without speaking. And I realized something then. I hadn't destroyed my family. I'd restored it. Not to what it was, but to what it should have been. A week later, a letter arrived from the Bureau of Cultural Affairs. They were returning several recovered works to their rightful owners. Enclosed was a photograph of one painting in particular, a Turner seascape, the one that used to hang in my father's study. It had been donated anonymously. The curator who oversaw its recovery wrote, "Sometimes truth finds its own way home." I kept that photograph on my desk. Not as proof of victory, but as a reminder that even the most damaged things can be saved if you're patient enough to see what's underneath. People think revenge is about winning. It's not. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself you gave away when you trusted the wrong people. I didn't ruin my family out of hatred. I did it because truth deserved better than to live behind locked doors. And in the end, that truth gave me back something no inheritance ever could, myself. Now, when I walk through a gallery and see my father's name missing from the plaques where it once hung, I don't feel shame. I feel calm. Because silence isn't always loss. Sometimes, it's just peace taking its place. And peace, I've learned, is the most valuable restoration of all.